call solace, tidings of great joy. Laplace, who read the heavens like an open book, who enlarged the horizon of human thought, is there too. Beethoven, master of melody and harmony, who added to the joy of human life, and who has borne upon the wings of harmony and melody millions of spirits to the height of joy, with his heart still filled with melody, he is in hell today. Robert Burns, poet of love and liberty, and from his heart, like a spring gurgling and running down the highways, his poems have filled the world with music, they have added luster to human love. The man who, in 4 lines, gave all the philosophy of life: to make a happy fireside clime for weans and wife, is the true pathos and sublime of human life. He is there with the rest. Charles Dickens, whose genius will be a perpetual shield, saving thousands and millions of children from blows, who did more to make us tender with children than any other writer that ever touched a pen. He is there with the rest, according to our Christian religion. A little while ago there died in this country a philosopher, Ralph Waldo Emerson, a man of the loftiest ideal, a perfect model of integrity, whose mind was like a placid lake and reflected truths like stars. If the Christian religion be true, he is in perdition today. And yet he sowed the seeds of thought and raised the whole world intellectually. And Longfellow, whose poems tender as the dawn have gone into millions of homes, not an impure, not a stained word in them all. But he was not a Christian. He did not believe in the tidings of great joy. He didn't believe that God so loved the world that he intended to damn most everybody. And now he has gone to his reward. And Charles Darwin, a child of nature, one who knew more about his mother than any other child she ever had. What is philosophy? It is to account for phenomena by which we are surrounded. That is, to find the hidden cord that unites everything. Charles Darwin threw more light upon the problem of human existence than all the priests who ever lived, from Melchizedek to the last exhorter. He would have traversed this globe on foot had it been possible to have found one new fact, or to have corrected one error that he had made. No nobler man has lived, no man who has studied with more reverence, and by reverence I mean simply one who lives and studies for the truth. No man who studied with more reverence than he. And yet, according to the orthodox religion, Charles Darwin is in hell. Consolation. So, if Christianity be true, Shakespeare, the greatest man who ever touched this planet, within whose brain were the fruits of all thought past, the seeds of all to be, Shakespeare, who was an intellectual ocean toward which all rivers ran, and from which now the isles and continents of thought received their dew and rain, that man who has added more to the intelligence of the world than any other who ever lived, that man whose creations will live as long as man has imagination, and who has given more happiness upon the stage and more instruction than has flown from all the pulpits of this earth, that man is in hell too. And Harriet Martineau, who did as much for English liberty as any man, brave and free, she is there. George Eliot, the greatest woman the English-speaking people ever produced, she is with the rest. And this is called tidings of great joy. Who are in heaven? How could there be much of a heaven without the men I have mentioned? The great men who have endeavored to make the world grander. Such men as Voltaire, such men as Diderot, such men as the encyclopedists, such men as Hume, such men as Bruno, such men as Thomas Paine. If Christianity is true, that man who spent his life in breaking chains is now wearing the chains of God. That man who wished to break down the prison walls of tyranny is now in the prison of the most merciful Christ. It will not do. I can hardly express to you today my contempt for such a doctrine, and if it be true, I make my choice today, and I prefer hell. Who is in heaven? John Calvin, John Knox, Jonathan Edwards, Torquemada, the builders of dungeons, the men who have obstructed the march of the human race. These are the men who are in heaven. And who else? Those who never had brain enough to harbor a doubt. And they ask me, how can you be wicked enough to attack the Christian religion? Oh, but they say, God will never forgive you if you attack the Orthodox religion. Now, when I read the history of this world, and when I think of the experience of my fellow men, when I think of the millions living in poverty, and when I know that in the very air we breathe and in the sunlight that visits our homes there lurks an assassin ready to take our lives, and even when we believe we are in the fullness of health and joy, they are undermining us with their contagion. When I know that we are surrounded by all these evils, and when I think of what man has suffered, I do not wonder if God can forgive man. But I often ask myself, can man forgive God? There is another thing. Some of these ministers have talked about me, and have made it their business to say unpleasant things. Among others, the Reverend Mr. Talmage of Brooklyn, a man of not much imagination, but of most excellent judgment, charges that I am a blasphemer. A frightful charge! Terrible if true. What is blasphemy? It is a sin, as I understand, against God. Is God infinite? He is, so they say. He is infinite, absolutely conditionless. Can I injure the conditionless? No. Can I sin against anything that I cannot injure? No. That is a perfectly plain proposition. I can injure my fellow man because he is a conditioned being, and I can help to change those conditions. He must have air, he must have food, he must have clothing, he must have shelter. But God is conditionless, and I cannot by any possibility affect him. Consequently, I cannot sin against him. But I can sin against my fellow man, so that I ought to be 1,000 times more careful of doing injustice than of uttering blasphemy. There is no blasphemy but injustice, and there is no worship except the practice of justice. It is 1,000 times more important that we should love our fellow men than that we should love God. It is better to love wife and children than to love Jesus Christ. He is dead. They are alive. I can make their lives happy and fill all their hours with the fullness of joy. That is my religion, and the holiest temple ever erected beneath the stars is the home. The holiest altar is the fireside. What is this blasphemy? First, it is a geographical question. There was a time when it was blasphemy in Jerusalem to say that Christ was God. In this country it is now blasphemy to say that he was not. It is blasphemy in Constantinople to deny that Mohammed was the prophet of God. It is blasphemy here to say that he was. It is a geographical question. You cannot tell whether it is blasphemy or not without looking at the map. What is blasphemy? It is what the mistake says about the fact. It is what the last year's leaf says about this year's bud. It is the last cry of the defeated priest. Blasphemy is the little breastwork behind which hypocrisy hides, behind which mental impotency feels safe. There is no blasphemy but the avowal of thought, and he who speaks what he thinks blasphemes. That I have had the hardihood, it doesn't take much, to attack the sacred scriptures. I have simply given my opinion, and yet they tell me that that book is holy, that you can take rags, make pulp, put ink on it, bind it in leather, and make something holy. The Catholics have a man for a pope. The Protestants have a book. The Catholics